So I'd like you to look at this little drawing here. This is a drawing of different types of cells, all of which exist or appear in your body. And you can see a lot of them have a little dot at the center. That would be the nucleus of the cell. So this is just one nerve cell with a little nucleus in the center. You can see there's several here of these gland cells that are all kind of around each other, so they're all used to surround. So that's several different cells, but you can see they all have a purple nucleus in the middle. Red blood cells, the nucleus isn't as obvious. You can see there's different types of nuclei that look different in each one, but they all have a similar structure. Well, a similar structure, but actually a very different structure, which is why your body can have the diverse things it has. So I'd like you to look at this list, and this one is a nerve cell. You might not be able to see that, but that's what it says back there. And think, is there anything here that's a part of my body that's not included in this list? You see nerve cells, muscle cells, bone cells, reproductive cells, blood cells, and gland cells. Those are the 6 kinds there. But do you think there must be other types of cells in your body for your body to work? Remember, your body is nothing but cells. So go ahead and type in the chat box if you can think of something else in your body that must be made of cells. Okay, so Joseph changed and still can't hear, huh? Brain cells, that's a good one. I'm glad your brain is working this morning. Anybody else? Anybody else can think of a type of cell? That's not listed here? I guess not. I guess not. Well, there are lots of organs in your body, and each one of those organs has different types of cells. So your heart muscle or your heart cell, I guess that's actually what this is right here, your cardiac muscle. Oops, let me go back there real quick. Your cardiac muscle, that would be heart muscle cells. But, your kidney is made of different cells. Your liver, your lungs, they all have to be made of different types of cells. Another obvious one might be your skin. That's the most, your lung, right, Zechariah, lung cells. Your skin cells are going to be unique in type. So there's going to be all kinds of different cells that are going to exist in your body. But these are a few of them. And they're actually probably around 20 to 40 trillion cells that makes up your body. That's what you are, is just a collection of 20 to 40 trillion cells that are all stuck together. And we're going to start thinking about and looking at what those cells are made of today. All right, so today we should be starting cell biology. You can see that's highlighted there. So you should be finishing up the section on living things and for sure starting on cells this week. And that's what we're going to do, is look for about the next 3 weeks at understanding the cells that make up your body and that make up the body of all animals and all plants. Now, to review last week, you might remember, and I'll just go through this quickly, the important people that helped us to realize that our bodies were made of cells. So Leeuwenhoek and Hooke were 2 of those important people, and once we invented microscopes, they began looking in them, and Robert Hooke was the first one to see little compartments, and he used the name cell to refer to those compartments because they look like the cells of monks. And there were little compartments in cork when he was looking at something from a cork tree. And they might have looked something like this: a whole bunch of cells with little walls separating them and stuff inside. And then Anton von Leeuwenhoek made his own weird microscope, and he saw something he called animalcules. They didn't really look like this, but they were kind of blobby, and they had lots of more interesting shapes. So he thought they looked sort of like animals. And so we call those bacteria. That's what he first saw, was bacteria. And then Schleiden made the realization, these are the important people, the important things you have to remember. Much later, 150 or 200 years later, after studying plants his whole life, realized, hey, all plants are made of cells. That's what all plants are. That's what all plant tissue is. So everything is just cells. And Schwann realized the same thing was true of animals, that there's nothing in an animal or in a plant that's not a cell. That's the basic building block of all of that life. And then finally, Virchow observed cells dividing, and he realized that those cells could only come from other pre-existing cells. They don't just appear out of nowhere. So cells divide, and that's how he made that realization. So those are the key people and the key events in the history of cell theory. Are you guys with me? Does that make sense? That's one of your lessons. That's the first lesson on cells. Danielle, Kiera, Joseph, are you guys with me? Joseph still can't hear yet, can he? Thanks, guys. All right, well now we're going to actually look inside a little bit more closely at those cells and see what they are made of. So what isn't a cell? Well, this is what you would look like if we could really get down close and look inside of a cell. And this in particular is an animal cell. Oh, I see Joseph left and came back, and hopefully he's going to come back with his computer audio on. Oh yeah, I think it's there. Can you hear me now, Joseph? We can hear you, and Jack's here too, it looks like. So you might want to mute your microphone, Joseph, and then there you go. All right. All right. So these are the different parts of a cell, and almost all cells have these parts. Now, in particular, these are just animal cells. This is an animal cell that I'm showing you now, but they would have all of these different parts, and these different parts all play important roles inside the cell. And what in your next lesson is going to ask you what those different roles are. And I bumped, all of you should be bumped ahead to the point where you're almost to these lessons, if not already there, because we all want to learn this stuff together. So we're going to look and we're going to now compare these different things in the cell, and particularly let me point out a few to kind of get the words in your head a little bit. Ribosomes, you're going to want to be aware of the nucleus, the Golgi complex, and you just need to know basically one or two things about each one of these. The different endoplasmic reticulums, the cell membrane, the mitochondria, the vacuole, and the lysosome. Does anyone know a word or a product that you might have in your house that has the word it starts with L-Y-S-O, lyso? You might use it in your house. You know, maybe people don't use it as much anymore, I don't know. Has anyone ever heard of the spray called Lysol? Yeah, so it comes from the same word. Yeah, it comes from the same word, and Lysol is basically like the vacuum cleaner, the cleaner of the cell. It cleans up all the gunk that's laying around and just helps dispose of it. So you can remember that word. It basically means to kill or to clean, to kill the bacteria or clean things up. So it does all the vacuuming, which, not to be confused with the vacuole, which doesn't do any vacuuming at all. So I didn't mean to confuse you there. But the lysosome is like Lysol. It's the cleaner of the cell. We're going to now look at the cell and compare it to a factory and think of how a cell might be similar to a factory. So we'll pretend like it's like a cookie factory. You guys know how I like food, right? And we're going to look at the parts of a cell and compare them to a factory. Yep, I'm a food guy. All right, let's see here. So I'm going to take my pen here and compare these things a little bit. So this in the center here is sort of like the control room of the cell. What do you think the control room, or the control room of the factory, what do you think the control room of the cell is going to be? That's right, the nucleus of the cell. The nucleus is the control room, and the nucleus contains very important information. Does anyone know what kind of information the nucleus contains? That's right, it contains something called DNA. And DNA are basically the plans or the directions that the cell is going to follow. And so that's kind of what is here. This box here in the middle is the plans, and then this whole thing is kind of the control room, the cell, or the cell nucleus. So the DNA, you've probably heard that word before, even if you don't know what it is. Every single cell in your body has the DNA that makes you you. It has all of the information that makes your nose the shape it is, and your skin the color it is, and your eyes the color they are, and the fact that you have two eyes. It makes sure you have two eyes instead of three or one. It makes sure you have two ears instead of three or one. All of those kinds of things are in your DNA. It's the plans for your whole body. But each cell uses parts of that DNA to decide what it should do. So if one of the cells becomes a liver cell in your body, then it's going to just do things that liver cells should do. And it's going to focus on the parts of the plans that have to do with producing things that liver cells need to produce. Yeah, deoxyribonucleic acid. And that word, you see that word ribo in there, Zachariah, actually. We'll see one of the things, a ribosome is going to be related to that. All right, so we know the nucleus, and then we've got these other things here. What does number 3 look like to you guys? What does it look like is going on in number 3 here? Over here in our cookie factory. What does it look like number 3? What's happening at number 3? Burning wood. Yeah, it's burning wood to generate power, and that's the power that's going to turn this pulley here over here, actually, that's going to make this machine work. So this is the power, and in your cell, instead of wood, which wood actually has some of this in it itself, but you're actually burning sugar. So number 3 is what's something called the mitochondria, and that produces all of the, so that's down here, mitochondria. So that's this orange thing in this cell, and that corresponds to this thing up here, and produces all of the power that's going to make the different parts of your cell be able to function. Yeah, like a furnace, exactly. A power source, a furnace, a generator, something like that. So that's the mitochondria. And then a few other things. So the endoplasmic reticulum and the ribosomes are the tiny little dots, which you can't even really see. You can see some of them here. On the side of the endoplasmic reticulum, the purple thing, the dots on the side, are ribosomes, and they're like the little things that punch out proteins. So they're like the little, I guess you might think of the endoplasmic reticulum as the conveyor belt, which holds all these ribosomes that are able to make different proteins. So these ribosomes are sort of the protein machine that makes the proteins. So those two things are kind of like where protein is synthesized. And protein is the most important thing that your cell does. Your cell exists to produce protein. If your cell were a factory, rather than producing cookies, the point of your cell is to produce protein. And those proteins are used for a wide variety of things in your body. Proteins in your body make up your hair. They make up structural parts of your body. They're used by your eyes to detect light. Some proteins are able to detect light. There's actually about 20,000 proteins in your body, or to help you to be able to smell. Other proteins, other proteins carry oxygen around your body. So hemoglobin is a large protein that carries the oxygen around your body in your blood cells, and actually holds that oxygen. And these proteins do a wide variety of things. They control the rate of chemical reactions in your body. They do all kinds of things. So your cells need to produce, at least between all of your cells together, about 20,000 different types of proteins in these ribosomes. And that's like the cookies. That's what you're trying to produce. And then number 6 here, what does it look like number 6 is? Number 6 down here. So stacking boxes of sugar, that's a good guess. You're on the right track. So we see 2 things being produced. One is the protein up here, and one is the sugar down here. And I'm going to explain the sugar thing in a minute. Because what's actually being produced is this sugar is being produced, and then it's being used in the furnace. So the sugar is not the product. The sugar is what's being used for power. But the 6 is where they're stacking the boxes to get ready to deliver them. So that's something called the Golgi body, or the Golgi apparatus here, and that's sort of like the storage room where you store the proteins before delivering them, and you deliver them to the cell, but you also deliver them outside the cell to other parts of the body where proteins might be needed. So you're basically packaging and getting ready to deliver those things based on instructions on where they should be delivered. And so that's basically the storage room and the delivery apparatus. And then, of course, you have the entrance and the exit. This would be the cell membrane, which controls what gets in and out of the cell, and can keep track of what gets in and out of the cell. Oops. What just happened here? And then the last thing here, this is for a plant cell in particular, is number 5. And that is the chloroplast. That's what actually produces the sugar by a process called photosynthesis. Now in animals, those sugars are produced, the energy is produced from stuff you eat, and that comes in the entrance, and it's allowed in by the cell membrane, and then it's used to power the furnace in the cell, which is used to then produce the proteins. So that's how a cell wall, and yeah, that could be a cell wall as well, Zachariah. So in a plant cell, that would be the cell wall and the cell membrane are right next to each other, but only plant cells have that cell wall. All right, so I know that's a lot to try to remember, but we're going to go through it again real quick and try to keep that stuff straight in our minds, because it's a lot of information, I know. So let's look again, comparing the cells at this little chart here, where we compare these different things. Remember, I said that the lysosomes are the custodial sort of the cleaners of the cell. So those aren't actually even in here, but if you could imagine a janitor being out here in the cell somewhere, that would be the lysosome. And then you could see the shipping room would be the Golgi body again. That's packaging and distribution. And then the transport of materials is the endoplasmic reticulum. That's like the conveyor belt that holds the ribosomes, where the actual, cookies would be produced, or the actual proteins in this case. And then the vacuole in plant cells is just a large storage room, not for storage of stuff to be delivered, but just storage of raw materials, basically. And then the mitochondria, of course, is the power plant. That's number 3 we talked about. The nucleus is number 1. And the cell membrane is, I guess, number 8 down here. All right. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you there, but I want to try to get those words in your mind a little bit. So you're thinking, let's see, Golgi body, what was that again? What was that about? Well, that was kind of like the packaging room. That's where all that stuff is held, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there are some differences between animal cells and plant cells, and it has to do with some of the things that exist in those two cells. So on the left here, I have a plant cell, and on the right, I have an animal cell. Name one thing that appears to be the same in the plant cell and the animal cell. All right, Zachariah Jaxie, the nucleus looks the same, doesn't it? Yeah. And same with the endoplasmic reticulum and the ribosomes that kind of surround the nucleus. But there are also some big differences. What is a difference that you notice between the two cells? No problem, Kara. Thank you. All right, so I see a cell wall, chloroplast. That's two of the key ones. In fact, you might have seen that on one part of the diagram if you were looking closely. So if you look over here on this part of the diagram, you can see that there are three things that are not in animal cells. One of those is a cell wall. It'll have a cell membrane, just like an animal cell, but it also has a cell wall, which helps to give plant their structures. The reason why plants don't need skeletons is because they have really strong cell walls that kind of hold those cells in place much more solidly. So it's more of a solid wall. And then you'll also see that plant cells have this large central vacuole, whereas there's a lot of these little tiny vacuoles in animal cells. There's just one large big one in plant cells like that, which is very obvious. And then, of course, chloroplasts is where photosynthesis, where chlorophyll takes place. The reason that leaves are green is because they have these chloroplasts in there that are able to take sunlight and carbon dioxide from the air and turn it into sugar to make food for themselves. Animal cells don't make their own food. That's the reason why every morning we have to cook up some eggs and eat our food. And a few times a day, actually. So that's the difference between plant cells and animal cells. And then now, the last thing I want to do is show you the difference between two other kinds of cells. Oh, no, actually, I'm going to ask you a couple questions because I want to get you guys thinking a little bit about what you're going to see on the quizzes. This is one of the questions on the quiz, actually, which would say, doctors are investigating the case of a patient with defective proteins. Which organelle is most likely the cause? So which one of these parts of the cell would have the most of these four here, would have the most relevance to the production of proteins that could actually be producing defective proteins? You got to pick one of these four options here: the lysosome, the cell membrane, the cytoplasm, or the ribosome. And that's a question you're actually going to see. Zachariah is guessing the ribosome, so is Joseph. That's exactly right. So the ribosomes, you remember, are the little sort of, machines that are spitting out these proteins on the endoplasmic reticulum. So the ribosomes could be the cause here of this problem. That's right, Bennett. We're going to get to 7th grade stuff here in just a minute. We're still on 6th grade stuff until 9:30. So you 7th graders just can sit tight until 9:30. So the answer here to this question would be ribosome. You might want to remember that because that's going to be on one of your quizzes. See, I'm just giving answers away here, aren't I? Another kind of question you'll see is they'll actually have a cell, and this is the exact picture they use of the cell, and they point to different parts of it and ask you to say what part they're pointing at. So what part is this X pointing at here in this plant cell? And I'll give you a bunch of options to choose from. the nucleus. These are basically all the options that you would have to choose from. Yeah, and it's hard to tell because these are all different similar sized things and they don't really have these colors in real life. But green really does indicate, and that's what, again, gives the leaves its green color, that this is chloroplasts that are doing that job using chlorophyll of producing sugar for the cell. And then you'll see things like the mitochondria, or would be these larger red ones. The lysosomes would be maybe these little ones here. And then the little red dots, are always the ribosomes because you can see them, especially on the endoplasmic reticulum. They're all stuck on there. That's how you know the ribosomes are these tiny little dots. And the endoplasmic reticulum is the large yellow thing there. We just went over that, Bennett, and we'll talk about that, or you might have that in another class. So, yeah, so everybody, 7th graders, just hold off on chatting and wait until I'm done with the 6th grade class here, okay? We're almost done. All right, this is the last slide I wanted to show you, 6th graders. And this is the difference between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Now, something that might shock you, really shock you, is to realize that eukaryotic cells, which is what your body's made of, the cells of human bodies, you have about 40 trillion of them. But you actually, in your body, have even more bacteria than you actually have human cells. There are more bacterial cells in your body than there are human cells. Now, those bacterial cells are smaller, and they would only fill up a jug of about a half gallon. But it's kind of disturbing to know that you have 100 trillion bacteria in your body. Most of them are good bacteria that are actually helping you, but they're not technically part of you as an organism. They exist inside your body. And there's actually half a milk jug of bacteria throughout, inside, and on your body, which I think is disgusting, but is actually pretty important for your body. And those bacteria are prokaryotes. And prokaryotic cells are smaller and more primitive cells that don't have a nucleus, like eukaryotic cells would. This is a Venn diagram to help you see the things that eukaryotes have are here, the things that prokaryotes have are here, and the things that they both have would be right here. So these prokaryotes, these bacteria, are small and simple. They don't really have any organelles, except, they sometimes have, they have ribosomes, would be the only organelle they would have, those small little ribosomes for making proteins. They're all unicellular, so they don't have more than one cell. They're just one cell by themselves, just like these little swimming bacteria down here. And again, they're all bacteria. But some things they have in common with eukaryotes is they do have ribosomes. They have DNA. It's just not inside of a nucleus. It's sort of floating freely around in the cytoplasm, which is just the juice inside the cell. And they also have a cell membrane. So that's the difference between prokaryotes, which are the sort of smaller, primitive bacteria, and eukaryotes, which are larger and more complex cells. I don't know if primitive is the right word. We haven't talked about white cells. So that's it, 6th graders. Thank you guys for being here. I'm going to end class now and move on to the 7th grade class. So you guys, 6th graders in 6th grade life science, are free to go, and we're going to start in on 7th grade science next. Bye, Jack. Bye, Danielle. Bye, Zechariah. And I'm going to take some attendance, 7th graders, real quick. So sit tight while I do that. Oops. What is the color of blood? Well, it depends on whether it's oxygenated or not. Let's see, here's my attendance sheet. You don't like kids from ages 4 to 8. Oh, that's too bad. I have a lot of those in my household, but sometimes I don't like them either. So I guess we can be honest about that. Well, I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old in my house, as well as a 6-week-old. And I have to say, they're all super cute, and I love them quite a bit. So, all right. So we have Lillian here, Aubrey's here. Alec and Bennett are here, and Elijah. Alec, Elijah, Bennett, Julia, Leah, Lily, and Persephone. Leah, Lily, Persephone. I think I got everybody there. Yeah, it's a lot of kids. Person with green blood? What are you talking about? You making stuff up? Are you making stuff up? All right. Well, good. I think I got everybody there. All right, so today we're going to talk about zombies. No, not really. All right, so the first question that I want to ask you today is, why do people build greenhouses and how do they work? So I want us to start thinking now about, we're going to talk about different types of energy resources, but also a little bit the effects of the fossil fuels we use and burn and how that affects our environment. Aubrey can't hear me. Oh no. Oh, that's because Aubrey is on phone audio and not computer audio. All right, so they're used to grow plants. Yes, exactly. They keep animals and harmful bugs out. That's true. So that you can have a little more controlled environment. They work by the sun. Yes, Persephone. Why else do people build greenhouses? And by that, I don't mean just a greenhouse that you would paint, but I mean a greenhouse. Well, greenhouse gases are called greenhouse gases because they perform the same function that a greenhouse performs, but they just do it as gases in the atmosphere. Or I could say an analogous function. So we're going to actually see the connection between greenhouse gases and greenhouses in just a minute. A tiny atmosphere. Yeah, so the key thing that greenhouses do, the most important thing that they do, is actually not really something that any of you mentioned, although Persephone kind of hinted at it. But the most important thing that they do is they collect sunlight, and that helps to warm the greenhouse, but they don't let that warm air then back out, because that warm air can stay enclosed once that sunlight has heated up the ground or the plants or whatever's inside. Good guess, Elijah. Yeah. They're used for weed. That's sometimes true. That heat does not escape. And so one thing that you'll notice if you've ever tried to grow tomatoes is that they don't start growing until about May because it's not warm enough outside. So people usually start tomatoes inside of a greenhouse, or else they buy them from a store already started, because we don't have a long enough growing season. Oh yeah, it's nice. It's better than the sound of my voice, isn't it? Ha ha ha. So greenhouse, and here you'll see a little bit more. Plants need sunlight, but they also need warm temperatures to thrive. And so that sunlight delivers heat through light waves, which are radiation, but that heat then can't escape once it's heated up the air and the ground inside. Okay, yeah. So they let light in, but they don't let heat out. And that's exactly what greenhouse gases do in the atmosphere. They let light in, and as it heats up, they don't let that heat then escape back into space, because a certain amount of that heat needs to escape into space, or else our planet gets too hot. All right, we don't need to talk about weed anymore in class, although I find it very interesting. It's probably your neighbors, the Grassels, isn't it, Persephone? I know about those guys. I know, I'm just kidding. It's not them. All right. So we're talking now about Earth's energy resources. We've kind of moved through these things on minerals and rocks and mapping the Earth. And we're talking about Earth's energy resources before we move into the second half of the class, which is on changing Earth and things that cause change on Earth. Right. Yeah, there's I'm not sure what to do for Aubrey here. Maybe your computer audio is not working. But thank you guys for trying to help. Now, some of you, how many of you, be honest, tell me if you're a little bit behind in class. Say, that's me, or raise your hand or something like that. Yeah, there are a few of you. A smidge, says Lillian. Well, I'd like to talk with you guys this week or early next week about individually about what we can do to help you get caught up in class. Because I'd like everyone to be caught up, because then the things we talk about in class are going to make a lot more sense to you while we're going through it. So I just want you to know that, and I want you to know that you can contact me and ask about that. If you're struggling or having a hard time or whatever, I want to talk to you about it. I don't want you to just struggle by yourself, because you're not the only one who might be a little bit behind or something like that. Thank you, Bennett. That's a little more specific. That probably might be more helpful. All right, so we've talked about Earth's energy resources. You remember that some of them are renewable and some of them are non-renewable. And the renewable ones tend to be renewed because the sunlight continues to give power. So hydroelectric power is renewable, for example, because the sunlight evaporates water and sends it back up into the mountains, where it can rain down and cause more water to come down the rivers. Solar power obviously comes from the sun. Even the wind comes from the sun. The sun creates temperature differences that cause wind to blow. All of these crops grow because of the sun, and then we can cut them down and burn them and produce power. And that sun is just never ending. Now, tidal power isn't really from the sun, but it has to do with the gravity of the sun and moon system. And Wave power, again, that comes from winds. So wave power is going to be also generated from the sunlight. So that's why most of these are renewable. Yeah, and those would be, the renewable ones would be considered inexhaustible. You could kind of use those words interchangeably, renewable or inexhaustible. Okay, well, we can talk more about that, Elijah, in person. So we talked about this a little bit last week, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But we also talked about why we call fossil fuels. And you might recall that we learned that coal comes from plants that die and decay, and oil comes from animals. So plants die and decay and they're buried, they become peat, then they get compressed without oxygen present, and they can turn into coal. And oil has the same thing happens with animals at the bottom of maybe a shallow ocean or something like that. They get buried and then compressed, and then their bodies then can turn into oil. Yeah, peat. Sorry, PEAT is peat. That's the intermediate stage between just decaying matter at the bottom of a little lake and coal. In fact, there are places where people actually harvest peat, which has not yet become coal, for energy as well. I think Indonesia is very popular for that. So that, again, that's fossil fuels. We talked about that also last week. Now it's time to move on to some new stuff. Do you know who this guy is? Or gal? Don't want to assume anything. Does this guy look familiar? I hear someone guess Einstein, someone guess Edison. Looks like more people are guessing Einstein. He is a little younger here, so he does look a little bit more like Edison than sometimes. But this is Albert Einstein, and this is just a younger picture of him. And we're about to talk about nuclear power, and Albert Einstein was a key figure in helping us understand how nuclear power works, because we didn't know this until about 100 years ago. It's a brand new field of science. Understanding the nucleus. Does anyone know what the most famous equation is that Albert Einstein came up with? You almost always see it connected to him, and rightly so. Yes, E equals mc squared. That's the famous Einstein equation. And this is the key equation, actually, for understanding how nuclear energy works. Because what you're doing in nuclear energy is you're deriving energy from mass. Normally, it was thought, throughout history, it was thought that mass would be conserved. That's one of the foundational principles of chemistry, is conservation of mass, meaning that if you have something like this broomstick or this phone and you break it or burn it or do anything with it, you can't change you can't change the fact that this has mass. The mass might turn into something else like gas or a liquid or something else depending on what you do to this phone, but it's always going to be mass. It's not going to turn into something else or disappear. You can't get rid of mass. Well, it turns out sometimes you can. That mass can actually turn into energy, and that's what this equation is saying, that E, energy, equals mass. So if you want to take a certain amount of mass and turn it into energy, all you have to do to figure out how much energy that would be is multiply it by c squared, the speed of light squared. That's what c is just the speed of light. So that's a very big number, which means you can have a small amount of mass multiplied by the speed of light squared, a very big number, is going to get you a large amount of energy, which is why nuclear energy is so powerful. You don't need to get rid of much mass or change much mass into energy to get a lot of energy. So that's the key thing to understand here, energy and mass in this equation. Hover cars. Well, I mean, you can hover by like a hovercraft. They have hovercraft, but they don't hover quite as high as you might like. So there are two types of ways to make this mass turn into energy, to turn mass into energy. One of them is fission, and the other one is fusion. So the word fission, have you guys ever heard of a fissure before? Well, the word fission comes from that word fissure. It means basically a crack. And in fission, you're splitting apart a nucleus, so you're cracking it apart. Yeah, that's right, Leah. So fission is to take apart, and fusion is to put together. So fission also might be a fissure you might get on your thumb or something like that, or your finger, like this cut here. So fission happens when you take the nucleus of an atom, which would look something like this, and you split it apart. Oh, it's got to be easier than that. But what you need to have to split it apart is a very large atom. You can't split apart an atom this small as oxygen like this one. You need a very large one with a very large nucleus. And when you have a large atom with a large nucleus, you can then split that atom apart like this, causing something called a chain reaction. So the way that you split it is, if you fire a neutron at it fast enough, it's going to split into two things. So something like uranium, you've probably heard that uranium can be enriched and can become, this is uranium down here, is an element with 92 protons, and it can be split into radium and krypton. So this would be split into two nucleuses, one of radium and one of krypton. And when it does that, a little bit of mass is changed into energy. So that's where the energy comes from. And 3 more neutrons are released that can then bump into other uranium atoms. And that's actually the key here, because if you get enough uranium, if you have just one uranium atom and you produce a tiny amount of energy from it, that's not a big deal. But if you get a whole bunch of enriched uranium all together at the same time, then one uranium atom can split into krypton and beryllium, or barium, releasing 3 neutrons, and those 3 neutrons can then hit more uranium atoms that are nearby, if you have enough that are nearby, and split those uranium atoms into krypton and beryllium, and release even more neutrons that can hit more uranium atoms, and each time that happens, you're releasing a little bit more energy. And that energy is going to produce a nuclear, could it be explosion, or if you control it, a nuclear energy that you can then harvest and use. Then fusion, and please let's stop talking about Pokemon. Fusion is then when two things are joined together. So whereas we take large atoms and split them apart, if we have small atoms, we can actually fuse them together into something heavier. Oh, that's great. Glad to hear it, Aubrey. Or thanks for telling me, Leah. Just like 2 tomatoes that might have got fused together. That's one example of fusion. And the most common type of fusion, yeah, it's not one you'd want to eat. You probably think it's like radioactive or something like that. Radioactive tomato. If you have 2 hydrogen atoms, you can actually fuse them together like this. These are different types of hydrogen, tritium and deuterium. You can actually fuse them together into making a larger atom called helium, which has 2 protons, and this is helium here. And when you do that, you release a neutron that can then go and hit some other atoms to make energy, but to split or to help fuse more of those together. But you're also, again, turning some mass. There's some lost mass that's turned into energy. So smaller atoms can do the same thing, but by fusion. Now this Okay, Bennett, thank you for waiting. We can do it at the end, as long as it's fair. You don't make water this way because water is a chemical reaction. These are nuclear reactions where you're changing the very substance. You're not changing from carbon, from oxygen and hydrogen into uh, H2O, water, but you're actually changing the hydrogen itself and fusing them together so that there's no more hydrogen that exists. Instead, it's turned into helium. This is a much more basic and much more powerful thing that happens than these chemical reactions that just join atoms together so that they're near each other. But fusion actually pushes their nuclei together so that they join together and become a totally different substance, a totally different element. This is what the sun is doing. The sun is using nuclear fusion to fuse hydrogen into helium, and that's how all the energy of the sun is produced, is fusing hydrogen into helium. The problem is we don't have the ability to control that yet on Earth because it's a very clean and very powerful energy source that we simply can't control on Earth yet. It'd be like creating a miniature sun on Earth, and that's just too much power for us to handle. You're right, my battery's almost dead. You trying to get me to stop? But we have been able to have tiny bits of fusion where we take actually fission bombs. You've heard of of nuclear bombs. Well, we've taken fission bombs where we explode uranium. We use that to create enough temperature and pressure to then actually fuse hydrogen and helium together, and we've created things called neutron bombs or thermonuclear explosions, and these are the most powerful explosions we've ever created on Earth. And these bombs are not like the fission bombs we dropped in World War II, say, on the Japanese. We destroyed whole cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima with simply fission bombs, but we subsequently created bombs that were 1,000 times more powerful than those bombs in Japan, like this explosion here. They've never been used in war. They've only been tested in different places on Earth where we have used thermonuclear weapons to actually create fusion on Earth. So that means this right here is a miniature sun, which is fusing hydrogen into helium, just a small amount of it, to create a miniature sun on Earth, which is why these are such powerful bombs and so terrifying. And luckily, it's not something we've had to deal with lately. Okay, I'm sorry, Lillian. Let me see if I can, I have my power right here. Maybe if I plug in, that'll help a little bit. So that is fusion. That's what happens in the sun. Now, in a power plant, we can use fission. Again, remember, we can't really control fusion. We can use it in bombs, but we haven't been able to use it inside of a power plant to control it. And nuclear power plants, you've probably seen them with these large water towers where the steam is coming off. We use nuclear fission to create power. We don't really do it so much in the US anymore, and since we've had nuclear meltdowns in different places like Japan, people have gotten scared of this kind of technology. But it still is a useful technology, and one of your lessons, of course, wants you to know how it works. So what you do is you take some uranium, you put it inside a reactor vessel, which would be right inside of here, and you take these control rods. Oh, it would take a long time, Lily. And these control rods made of cadmium, which is an element in the periodic table, allow you to control how fast that reaction takes place. So you don't actually get a nuclear explosion. That cadmium can absorb those neutrons that are trying to split more atoms and slow down that reaction. So you can control the reaction. And when you control it, then you can use that to heat up some water really hot. And that you're going to take to a generator where you're going to turn water, a different set of water, into steam. And that steam is going to be used then to turn a turbine, which is going to then power a generator to produce electricity. So just like a hydroelectric plant, you let water flow down through a dam and it turns a turbine to turn a generator to create electricity. Well, nuclear reactors heat up water to create steam that turns a turbine to create electricity. That's an interesting question, Lily. The problem with the sun is the reason why it has to be a certain size in order for it to shine, for nuclear fusion to take place. In fact, Jupiter is basically the same materials as the sun, and it's the largest planet. It's basically just hydrogen, but it's not large enough to create the sort of gravitational force necessary to produce fusion. But if you could make Jupiter bigger, or if you could make something about, I think it has to be like 10 times the size of Jupiter, then it would start to ignite and create, it would burn and create radiation in the form of sunlight. Yeah, losing the sun, we can't replace the sun. Good question, though. I like it. And this is a little stuff about the greenhouse effect here. I just want to make sure you understand as we start at the beginning, thinking about the greenhouse gases. Well, just like the greenhouse has a protective covering, the Earth has a protective layer of greenhouse gases like methane, water vapor, and carbon dioxide. And those things, rather than allowing the Earth to emit heat, infrared heat, into space, it absorbs that heat and sends it back in different directions, sometimes sending it back to Earth. And so if we build up greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, we can build up the heat in the atmosphere. And you can see how certain parts of the Earth, like the Sahara Desert, are going to be much hotter than others. Right. And we've actually been able to track greenhouse gases every year since 2000. So measuring the atmosphere, you can see that since 1975, greenhouse gases have been steadily rising, and they're now actually up past 400 ppm, or parts per million. So that there's a third more carbon dioxide, one of these greenhouse gases, in the air now than there has been at any time in human history. You're breathing air that has more carbon dioxide in it than anyone before you has ever breathed. And that carbon dioxide acts like a greenhouse to help keep that heat in, just like a greenhouse does. And that's the problem with fossil fuels, is they release these greenhouse gases that cause these problems. So when we burn gasoline in our car, we're adding extra carbon dioxide to the atmosphere and contributing to that graph going up and up and up. And that leads, of course, to effects like rising sea level, which is already affecting parts of the world and makes storms much worse, like we noticed in New York a couple of years ago. Glaciers are melting. Ocean temperatures are rising, so the oceans are becoming more acidic, which is actually killing off corals, our little friends that the parrotfish would eat and poop out. And also, it causes weather changes. So droughts, hurricanes, and heat waves become much worse, and that affects human health and changes ecosystems so that, polar bears are living in a much warmer, the Arctic actually is warming much faster than the rest of the world, a much warmer environment where they have to do a lot more swimming than they used to do, and maybe have to change the way they live to survive. All right, that's the end of class today. That's nuclear energy, as well as the greenhouse effect we talked about, and a little bit about fossil fuels. I hope you guys are well. Again, we'll talk this week about where you are individually in terms of your progress and how to get a little bit farther. But for now, just be sure you're finishing about 3 quizzes per week. And if you can keep that going, you're going to stay caught up where you need to be. Oh, I'd love to go to Antarctica. What do you call your Tesla if it gets stolen? You guys are free to go. See, Thomas Edison was accused of stealing all of Nikolai Tesla's secrets and becoming famous. The reason why we talk about Thomas Edison being famous and not Tesla is because Edison stole some of his ideas or made sure that he wouldn't be successful in uh, in certain things he was trying to do. So I guess if someone steals your Tesla, you call him an Edison. That's good. That's good. Singing time. Oh, what should I sing? Leave now if you don't want to hear me sing. Ultimate Showdown. The final countdown. It's the final countdown. Uh, excuse me. Yeah, I'm still sick. I don't think I can really sing for you guys. I don't know what to sing either. I don't really have a song in my, in my heart right now that I want to sing. Let's see. Are there any songs about the seaweed is always greener, somebody else's lake? You guys know that one? You dream about going up there, but that is a big mistake. Just look at the world around you, right here on the ocean floor. Such wonderful things surround you. What more is you looking for? Yeah, there you go. There's your song for the week. Since we're talking about rising sea level, we might as well sing Sebastian's song. Under the sea, under the sea. Darling, it's better down where it's wetter. Take it from me. All right. That's all you get. I'm done. But that was a long slideshow, wasn't it? Yeah, Little Mermaid is pretty good. It was the Little Mermaid was like the Lego movie of my generation or whatever. It was the most popular, or Let It Go, I guess, most popular cartoon movie. Although maybe Aladdin was. Aladdin was a pretty good one too. Adios, Aubrey, Elijah, Julia. Any questions? All right. Bye.